Our guest Jacob Cooper will be sharing his near-death experience and formative experiences and opportunities he's had since that time. Jacob L. Cooper is the best-selling author of Life After Breath, which we'll be discussing today. He's also the author of the newly released book, The Wisdom of Jacob's Ladder. Jacob is a speaker on grief, wisdom, and consciousness, offering meditation and mindfulness seminars to help people find purpose and overcome the fear of death. Jacob works as a clinical social worker, Reiki Master, and Psychotherapist. He's also a Certified Hypnotherapist, specializing in Past Life Regression. Jacob draws from his personal and professional experience to empower one soul at a time. His website is www.jacoblcooper.com. It's a pleasure to be with you today, Jacob. Could you share with us the story of your NDE?
Absolutely. September of 1993, as a result of whooping cough, I had my near-death experience. I was just at the age of 3 years old, and I went to a playground with family friends of mine, and I climbed up onto a ladder going into a slide, and at the top of the ladder just lost all of my breath as, there was nothing really to hold on to, and I suffocated as a result of pertussis, otherwise known as whooping cough. And so each part of my body ceased to function. It wasn't working due to the suffocation and deprivation of oxygen. And so I was able to get out of my body because my body wasn't working. Much like if a car wasn't working, as I always say, you wouldn't just hang out in the car, you would pop the engine, check the hood, and see what's going on. And so for myself, I was able to become aware of my body, what was happening into it, and the suffering that I was going through. And the last part that I just became aware of, in my body was my brain. And I was able to really have a profound understanding of my body and my brain and what purpose it was serving and, just stuff that people probably in med school aren't privy to. And I was just 3 years old at the time. But then once I was in my brain, I was able to feel it. And I just felt this large crack in half as if, electricity is plugged into a wall and then the plug is yanked out of the wall, but yet I was still going on more so than ever. And once my brain felt this large snap in half, that's when I really was able to release a lot of this pain and suffering, and incubation period of my suffocation. And I was able to really go into a new breath, a breath beyond the body, the breath of eternity that we're all forever connected to. And so I crossed over to the other side, to this deep part of me that couldn't be harmed or ever damaged or ever taken away in a way. And I became aware of all the things that were always deep inside of me and around me. But I guess, as humans, we have our blockers on and sometimes or blinders on, and sometimes we forget that around. And so this near-death experience encompassed awareness of my own spiritual guides, angels, the highest endless apex where all things emanate from, which to me I could best describe as God. Not best describe, but that's the word that most people understand, but there is no word to describe it. Um, to aware of Christ consciousness, um, became aware of, angels that were overlaying this reality right above it, right with us. And these angels were just endless right in front of me. And I was also able to encounter soul family members. I became aware of, why I was here, what my life purpose was about, what I would be doing, and just became aware of this timeless place that we all come from, where the best way I could describe it is all was well, will be well, was well, in this timeless space with no time and no end to how good you could possibly feel. It's the home of the soul. Um, so my NDE is usually near-death experiences have one or two positions where they're either told that it's not their time yet, that they have to go, or they're given decision or choice or autonomy. And in my near-death experience, I was given choice as to what I would do. And so being that I was 3 years old, I was just so curious with what I would be like when I got older. What was my life going to look like? What would I look like? Why am I here? And so basically, I just kind of asked, like, what is this life about and what is it going to lead to? Why am I here? What's my purpose? And then I was able to see a lot of my own future, which is the kind of stuff that I'm doing now, which is helping people, speaking to people. And so I thought the other side was as beautiful as anything. But looking back in it, I recognized, that bringing that awareness to other people will allow people to not have to go to heaven, but a place as a destination, but a place that they could step into even in the body and beyond the body. And so it was with that decision that I decided, that was decided to stay. And once I made that choice, all things dissipated my immediate awareness, but I knew they were around me, and I woke up in a hospital bed. But I forgot to mention that there was also a lot of awareness of not only the life review of my short 3 years, which sounds short, but I was able to feel it from not only my perspective, but from others. But this life review transpired this lifetime. It also went into other different incarnations as well too, which hopefully in the interview we could get into because I do believe a lot of near-death experiences are designed before we get here in the pre-life planning phase, but they're also could be related to past lives, which I don't hear other experiencers discuss. So yeah, hopefully if you have any other questions, I'm sure you have a lot. Let's get into it.
From what I gather from your book, as you were shortly after you left your body, you met Jesus, and then you also met two angel beings that you'd met that you knew before this world. Can you tell us about those encounters?
Absolutely. Those beings, in our vernacular would be described as guardian angels or spirit guides, which, you know, in my NDE and beyond my NDE, I had recollection that this life was an intelligent life. It was not random. It was organized before we got here. So there was a pre-birth um, intelligence through beings on the other side that help to orchestrate our lives. And some of those beings that help orchestrate our lives are our spirit guides. And when I saw my spirit guide, I was guides, plural. There was two of them. Um, I was able to have a profound awareness of how powerful the connection that I had to them, while also feeling quite ashamed and embarrassed that I forgot that they were with me this whole time. But it was the most beautiful reunion I could ever describe. It was as if I was just looking at beings that had transparency of who I was. And some people know us, so we think we know them, but these spirit guides knew me to my fullest degree. And I could best describe them as the closest beings to who I am. They're almost me in a way, but the highest version of who I am, that's around myself. And it was a male and female guide. At the time, I knew their names coldly, and I was able to look at them right to the sides of me, and they were just incredibly immaculately beautiful beyond descriptive words. Um, and there was a male and female guide. I do want to preface that we have our contracted guides before we get here, our primary guides. But with life, as we evolve, we could add other guides as well. But these, what I'm talking about, are primary, as were my primary spirit guides. They're with me this whole time, really guiding me in this earth school. But it was a connection that went so far beyond just, this life, and it was just the closest part of myself that I could describe. Now, in terms of the Jesus encounter, I hear a lot of near-death experiencers, I see a lot of near-death experiencers who encountered Jesus himself not physically, but um, in front of them, clairvoyantly. Um, yeah, I think I'm using the term right, but yeah, right in front of them. I didn't encounter the physical presence where Christ, for instance, demonstrated a presence, physically in front of me. But I think my encounter went beyond that. You see, all of us have physical forms that we have. And so when on the other side, oftentimes you'll see mediumship readings where people will portray themselves a certain age or a certain way. But beyond that, portrayal is a consciousness, is an awareness that goes beyond this body, this form, this look, this age. So for myself, it was much more profound. I was connected to the the totality, the consciousness of Christ itself. Um, and the best way I could describe it is, we have sounds and vibrations, right? And everything vibrates. In my NDE, I was feeling that, certainly, that all things vibrate. And the higher you vibrate too, the closer you are to God itself. And for myself, at least, that encounter with Christ was an incredibly high vibration of love, acceptance, and just understanding. And it was as if it was like the pitch or the vibration on the other side. It was just this beautiful octave that I was, able to be in receiving of. So I think all of us have vibrations, and as we evolve and grow, our sound to the universe increases. The voice of the soul, gets higher and higher. So we're all artists in this lifetime. You don't have to actually sing, but we're here to really chip away at the masterpiece within so that, we could really become into our true form, which is, a being forever connected to God, a spiritual, infinite being having these different experiences, coming back into this endless ocean that we originate from.
Okay, so I appreciate that clarification. So you met, how do you say?
I had a Christ
You,
consciousness awareness.
yeah,
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 right,
because not everyone's familiar with that term, so I'm glad you heard you
right,
explain that. So it's you became aware of Christ's consciousness, not necessarily physical form,
right.
and you could sense his presence, and it's like maybe like did I don't know, thoughts came or feelings specifically, or just can you? I don't
I,
know if
I
you
would
can.
say, well, there's two things that could be true at the same time. In my NDE, I had an immense amount of trauma, that I had due to suffocation, which I do believe as to why I'm able to recall it with such clarity. Um, and so, yes, I was 3 years old when I had that, right? But when I
Mhm.
crossed over, there was a part of myself that was connected to that life and that experience, but then there was also a part of myself that was really in the seat of my soul, that was really connected to my soul, that went beyond, that particular experience, that body, that lifetime. And so our ages and lifetimes are things that we experience, but they're not the full totality of who we are. Who we are is the consciousness behind those experiences. And those experiences could elevate our lives too, those journeys. But we are timeless beings, having these temporary experiences.
Right.
And so this was a quite familiar encounter, with this Christ consciousness, but it felt like um, best way I could describe it is unconditional love, acceptance, understanding that I really needed because it was quite a transition. Um, and there was an incubation period of time that took me time to get used to the other side. It just didn't happen right then and there. It was a roller coaster of things. Yes, it was incredibly high, but it was also a transition. And so that was very grounding, comforting, and nurturing to the highest degree possible. Um, is what I would say. Uh, and it's very foreign in our life. We are used to our identities or our levels of acceptance based off of what we do. They're not based off of our being, who we are inside. And so on the other side, you're looked at for your real self, your true being, and the beautiful being that we all have inside of us. And so you're looked up at with curiosity, with love, with understanding of your real true self, over there. And it's the most beautiful place to be in. Something foreign than us, because we're used to being judged or condemned or evaluated minute to minute, be it either by ourselves or other people. And it's a very foreign world over there in that regard.
Yeah. Just to clarify, so um, I know a lot of people are concerned about the idea that you can remember something from when you were 3 years old. I can tell you from my studies of NDEs that it's very common that you remember enormous detail from these things. Um, and at all different kinds of ages. But if you could just help the audience understand a little better from your perspective how you remember these things, I think that would be helpful too.
Absolutely. There's many different reasons and angles, and we could almost do a whole video as to how it's possible to remember not only things from our early childhood, but things that I do in my professional work as a past life regression therapist, where you could have memory going back thousands of years, um, consciously or subconsciously. Um, what I would say is trauma is one of the gifts that I had from my near-death experience when I suffocated. And so trauma could be something that we push away to keep ourselves safe, or that it's very clear, in ourselves and our minds. And so I always give an example. I was in sixth grade when 9/11 happened, right? I don't know how old you are, but if you would ask me what happened 9/11, I could tell you exactly what happened. Ask me what happened 9/19, 9/20, I couldn't tell you for the life of me. So the event was so profound, and yet it was just so earth-shattering and traumatic, that's a gift of trauma that you are able to remember it. But also, this experience wasn't produced um, by my linear mind. It wasn't produced, by my brain. This experience went beyond my brain. And so that really gives us to the brain and mind component, where, for me at least, my brain was very limited in its functioning due to the deprivation of oxygen. And yet I had this whole other awareness in my higher mind. And so the higher mind has within itself, memories that go far beyond this lifetime. And so I was able to tap into that. And so I do believe that's really why I was able to, remember it so clearly. I really tapped into the higher mind, and I'm connected to it throughout the majority of my life. Now, some things are too overwhelming to know. If we would know everything at once, it would be impossible almost to do this lifetime. But, but I also think I had this experience not just for myself, but for others. And if I wasn't intended to remember it, or if I wasn't capable of doing it, it wouldn't be. But I'm not going to say I'm the chosen one, although I am Jewish. We are the chosen. No, but I'm just messing. But I would say this experience was intended for other people to hear. And that's why I was given this gift of miracle of surviving death, but also the miracle of holding onto it. But to myself, how could I ever forget this? It was so profound. It was so special. How could I ever forget it? And I'm amazed that people forget who they really are, where they really come from. So the way people look at me, I look at myself too, but at the same time, I look at other people and I say, how could you ever forget where you come from too? You know?
Yeah.
And the truth is, you wouldn't be listening to me right now if you really did. If you really forgot, no matter how much you push this away, you're tuned in here because there's something that we're talking about that's familiar.
Yeah, that's interesting that you say that. I've often thought that what would you say, we have just glimmers of memory of our life before coming to this earth. Um, and so, in fact, that could lead into what you're telling about spirit guides, and you remembered past lives, and that the angels you had known before this life. And you talked about it as your soul family.
Hmm.
Could you tell us a bit about your soul family and what you learned about them?
Well, it wasn't necessarily anything that I learned about them, but rather something that I just remembered, that was around me all the time. Shakespeare says, life is kind of like a stage and all that kind of stuff, and it's a theater, it's a play. And so with our different soul family members, we have this theater of life and the stage of life, and we take on these different roles and these different parts. But it's all about this play in this theater of life, and everyone understanding different roles and growing through those different roles and balancing things out by having the other perspective. You know, it helps in the earth school. I will say this. I use these terms, but I don't want them to be mistaken that we all are a part of the same soul family, right? We're all one. That does not mean that we're all the same. Sameness is not oneness. They're different. But I would say there are nuclear components to soul family. that each individual has in more of a closer basis, which goes far beyond this lifetime, and it's really a core of who you are, what you're connected to, beyond the phyla that we are all a part of. I am my own biggest skeptic, though, and so I had this profound experience, but I needed validation as an adult later on in life. And so a couple of days ago, it was my aunt's 11th year anniversary of her passing, or I think it was around 11 years, something like that. And right when she was about to go, she had, this kind of death visit, this death vision. I'm using the term wrong. This terminal lucidity, rather, when she was about to go, which is common for people who are about to leave this world, and yet they have this profound awareness of themselves crossing over, and there's almost kind of incubated between this world and the other side, and they're having both experiences available. But before she was about to go, she kept on reiterating the same message of pictures, and she said, if you look at a picture, of a family, they might look differently, but you look at the eyes, they look really the same. There's something profound connecting them. I thought, fine. And then a year or two later, she was coming through evidential mediumship through another reader, and she just kept on saying, why is your aunt talking about the concept of pictures? Why is she mentioning pictures? And I just knew that was a validating message of what the her message of the soul family was really all about, was this undeniable connection, that goes far beyond this lifetime. That if you really look closely into the doorways of who we are, into the windows of the soul, if you look at a group of family, not all, but there's a very profound connection and energy that ties members together.
Yeah. So, you talked about growing up in your Jewish faith, and there were some pretty significant, interesting events you talked about in your book. The first being that when you first had your NDE, it was actually on Yom Kippur. And then later on, you talk about that at the end of high school, you went to a trip to Jerusalem and were taught by a rabbi and had a wonderful experience there. Could you tell us about those things?
Yeah, I mean, well, to preface, my NDE happened, right around the Yom Kippur time, a couple days earlier. Those aren't familiar, it translates as like the time of the high holidays. Doesn't mean high where you take marijuana, you smoke it, but some people do that, but mean like high spiritual elevation. And so it's a time where the soul is getting itself ready to meet the creator, to really manifest a year of health, abundance, prosperity, and to rid one's wrongdoing, so to speak. So in a way, it's a day of atonement and a day of judgment in a way. And so little did I know I was about to meet the creator, but it wasn't through a synagogue or through religion. It was through the doorways of my heart and something that I was forever connected to, which I believe spirituality can be found within religion, but it transcends religion, if that makes sense. Um, Now to your question regarding, I took a gap year after high school, which changed the trajectory of my life, and I lived, in Israel, for a period of time, and there I was, with my NDE, I really kind of buried it. It was always there, but in order to survive, I kind of just needed to fit in, and I couldn't have this constantly, getting in the way of my life and learning how to be a kid again and a teenager. And so it was always there, but something that I just kind of pushed away as something that was more of a nuisance than anything. But I believe going to Israel allowed me to really come back to a sense of looking at things through a broader perspective and seeing things, beyond this life and having a different sense of value systems. So, I really dabbled in a lot of Jewish mysticism, Kabbalistic kind of stuff. And I, I, I say there are many paths up the mountain, but at the end of the day, they're all kind of saying the same thing. But the greatest journey that we have, is not through a belief system, but through the journey within. I think that's the most rewarding one. It's the most personal, and so this really got me on a quest to really go back to my roots. But, as a kid and young teenager, this near-death experience profoundly changed me. I had, these incredible insights and premonitions that would always just happen. And so it really got in the way of my life, and it was something that I saw more as a nuisance than anything. I would see things, know things, hear things that would just happen all the time, and it was just very frustrating where I just wanted to be a kid, not being bothered by stuff and just having things unfold naturally. But then there's just this other awareness that would come, and then I would see it, and then it would happen, later. And it was very annoying. And so earlier in life, it was a pest to me, but later in life, I saw it as a blessing. And so I think my NDE was something that I had to push away to survive, but always keep in my heart. But to thrive, I needed to make sense of it and integrate it when I was ready. And that happened, probably my early college years and right after high school.
There's a lot written online about how after an NDE, people will have these kind of after
After
effects.
effects, yeah.
Yeah, after effects. And so it's a very common NDE effective. And so makes sense that, yeah, you're open to the spirit world, you're open to that dimension, and you're still receiving these messages and having experiences similar to your NDE. And a little bit in my own life, if I could share, I could relate to that in that I didn't have an NDE, but I did have cancer as a teenager, and found a connection to God as I was learning to disidentify with my body and go deeper and deeper into stillness. I could feel more and more presence of my. I could feel my spirit, and I could feel the spirit world, and I could feel God's presence. And so then, when I found these NDEs, I got a little bit of the sense from my own experience. It was like, wow, this is kind of like what I had, but even more intensified. And so, but you're never the same after that. I was never the same.
Right.
So I can,
Oh,
I can at least somewhat appreciate what you're saying, because there's always been that connection after that experience. And I find that that's true in many cases. Um, okay. So you talk in your book about using mindfulness meditation to connect to God, and so that you don't have to go through an NDE yourself. And could you talk to us about some ways that you can connect to God or spirit world now, and how others can connect that way without having to have an NDE?
right. Yeah, I think the issue with near-death experience is that it uses the term death. And I know I'm friends with him, but and he's on my endorsement of my first book, Dr. Raymond Moody, who coined the term NDE, will tell you himself that it doesn't have as much to do with death as it does the stuff that happens beyond it. That these are experiences of higher consciousness with limited to non-existent physical bodies. And so it really highlights that there is no true death. There could be death of the body, but not death of our consciousness and death of our awareness. And so I think people like yourself or myself, they have all these different terminologies, but to me, they're eternal life encounters or experiences where we touch on eternity, where we have these experiences of remembering where we're forever connected to, where we come from. And so that could happen in the body and that could happen beyond the body. And so this doorway to this awareness isn't 1,000 miles away. It's right within ourselves. And sometimes we have these physical shake-up experiences to open up that doorway because we're so kind of in the routine of life. And sometimes we get pulled from that plug in a way, and then we tap into that spirit part of ourselves. Um, the issue I find, and this really was the impetus of writing my books, was that a lot of people put near-death experiencers on pedestals, or they find that these are things that they have that they don't. What I say is you're listening to a near-death experiencer really because there's something conscious or subconscious that's quite familiar in what they're saying. Otherwise, you would not be wasting your time doing it. But B, you know, death of the body doesn't create this stuff. It could open ourselves up to it, but could also have this awareness in the body and beyond. And so um, there's a phenomenon, for instance, and Dr. Raymond Moody's is asked about this. He's like, what do you think of shared death experiences? And he said, I'm almost more blown away by those because there's nothing that you could possibly explain. Your body is totally healthy and fine, and yet you're having these profound experiences in which you cross over with a pet or a family member when they go to the other side. So nothing changes physiologically, but this thing, whatever you want to call it, our soul, the higher mind, whatever, has an existence beyond just the body. Um, so I think mindfulness really could help people, and meditation as well. Um, I think meditation, in a way, is having a familiarity or an intimacy with eternity. Because when you meditate, and you do it often, you're recognizing that there is a you beyond the you, there's a world beyond this world, there's a life beyond this life, and there's a reality beyond our thoughts and beyond our emotion. And you just know, no matter what that box is filled with, whatever you might experience will be carried over beyond just this body, that there's a greater you beyond the you as you see yourself in this body. And so I think that's pivotal because to me, in a way, it's a recharge of ourselves. I think we charge our bodies, often through rest, through sleep, but we have to understand that we're more than a body, that we're a soul. And when you can meditate, that's a great way to recharge your inner being and just remember that that part of you is not of the on this is not just on this earth, it not is not is on this earth but not of this earth, if that makes
Yeah,
sense.
appreciate that. So, unfortunately, we're out of time, but I really appreciate this time with you and everything you've shared with us, and it's been a real pleasure. So, thank you so much.
An honor. Thank you for all you do, Matthew.